Let's talk about punctuation. So there's lots of different ways that people like to talk about punctuation. I prefer to think about punctuation kind of in three groups. And so there's the enders, there's the parentheticals, and there's the continuers. And obviously the continuers are the biggest group. And it's probably also the group that people are least familiar with. Going from left to right, it also speaks to how familiar people are with punctuation. So let's start at the very beginning. And by beginning, I mean the enders. These are the ones that bring us to a close, and we only have a few in English. We're not very inventive that way. And these are also the ones that you probably have used your entire life and know exactly how to use them, but we'll go over them just to be safe. First off, the period. Our least exciting and most common punctuation marker. Usually, it's pretty neutral unless you say something like, that's what I did, period. That is the punctuation version of a mic drop, and you are a total badass if you do that. So, next we have the question mark. Yeah, I know, right? You use it to ask questions. Did you get that? Cool. The exclamation point. You're so freaking excited, just like Kristen Wiig on SNL. But just note, you do not need 15 exclamation points. In standard writing, one exclamation point will suffice all by itself, okay? Unless you're texting someone, stick to the one exclamation point rule. Also, don't put periods and exclamation points or question marks and exclamation points together in standard academic writing. If it's a text message, go for it. I mean, right? And I ask this question because we need to talk for a moment about how do we diagram a question. Now, it actually sounds like it's this big rigmarole, but actually it's pretty simple. All you need to do is you turn the question into a declarative sentence. So for example, if we say, what do you mean? The actual thing you're saying is, you do mean what? When will we go? We will go when. To whom am I speaking? I am speaking to whom. In this way, and when we put it this way, we're better able to see how it matches up with the diagrams that we've already learned. So what do you mean is actually a subject with a transitive verb and a direct object. When will we go? We have we, the subject, will go, which is an intransitive verb, and then when is an adverb that modifies will go. To whom am I speaking? We have again the subject with an intransitive verb modified by an adverbial phrase, to whom. Things to notice. Capitalization remains the same in order to indicate that we have actually diagrammed a question and not a declarative sentence. Next up, we have the parentheticals. So parentheticals can do different types of things. Sometimes they have information that is interesting to know but not necessary. Sometimes they're used to indicate ownership of the language. So for example, parentheses. This is the literal parenthetical, okay? It can be used to separate out a qualifier or indicate an aside or an extra, like I said. And of course, it's also used to set off in-text citations in MLA. Next, we have the quotation marks. And then this would be the case where we're actually showing that somebody else has said these words, right? We're showing a direct statement from another person's dialogue or texts. Again, we need those for doing citations. Next up, we have the single quotes. The single quotes are a little less common than the quotation marks, the double quotation marks. However, they still are there. And usually we would only see the one quote, which we would call an apostrophe. So these are used sometimes when we want to indicate that a word is contentious, right? We're using it in a way that's contentious. But it can also indicate a possessive, as in Alex's, as well as contractions, don't, can't, that sort of thing, as well as truncation. And truncation is just a fancy word for saying that we're shortening a word and not including letters. So, for example, workin' instead of working. Now, the next few ones, the M dash, the N dash, and the hyphen, They straddle the line between parentheticals and continuers, but I wanted to put them together because they look so similar, so knowing the difference between them is going to be very important for when you use them in your writing. An em dash is the longest of the horizontal strokes, okay? It indicates a break in thought or tone. It's similar to parentheses, but it's punchier. And sometimes in a bibliography, if we have multiple pieces by the same author, we can use that to substitute for the person's name rather than writing it over and over and over again. Next up, we have the N dash, which is the second longest after the M dash, and it's used to indicate things connected by distance or time. So for example, when we say that we will be in class from January to April, if you were to do January to April with a dash, it would be an N dash. It's also used to connect a prefix to a proper noun, such as pre-World War II. But that's not a grammatical rule, that's actually a style rule. So you need to actually figure out within your own style school what is going to be the one that works best for you. Our last one is the hyphen, and the hyphen is obviously the shortest one, and this is used to connect compound words. That is what the hyphen is used for. It's used to connect, or names, right? So if I said Jean Paul and that was one word, that would be connected by a hyphen. Now onto the actual continuers, and this would be the colon and the semicolon, okay? So the way I like to think about this is in a biological way, okay? So a colon, it ingests and it breaks down, okay? So a colon is used to precede lists. It's used obviously between the hour and the minute and time, and it can be used for emphasis, right? So there's one thing I hate, colon, broccoli. Semicolons, on the other hand, we can think about as inefficient colons, okay? It's like when you eat corn, right? The kernel is still on the other side of the semicolon. So you're connecting two ideas that are related, right, but that are complete by themselves. Semicolons could be replaced by a period, and that would be fine. It also separates items in a list that have commas within it already. So it's used so that there's not like 10 billion commas in just a few words. Next up, we have the ellipses and the slash. So ellipses, also affectionately known as the dot dot dot, is actually a representation of a Greek technique by the same way. And it shows that there's an omission, right? That there's something missing. In a quote, if you have a stretch of language in the passage that you don't want to use, right? You just want to connect 2 points, then you can actually use an ellipses in the middle to say there's more here that is not important to what I'm trying to get at, okay? And it's always 3 dots, not 4, not 2, 3. Next up, we have the slash, which is also called a solidus or a virgule. So a slash solidus indicates a choice of some sort, okay? So the most common example that we use all the time would be and or. It's also used to write fractions, obviously. Solidus is the technical term in writing. However, when you use it to indicate line breaks in poetry, it's called a virgule. And virgule actually comes from the Latin word vir, meaning man. Think about it. Grammar is scandalous, y'all. So, the last thing we need to talk about is everybody's favorite, commas! So, commas are the thing that I hear at least 99.9% of the time people say, I don't know how to use commas. And that's because commas are insane, okay? There's so many little rules to commas. I understand, I feel your pain. Let's just go through the uses. You're not responsible for them all right now. Let's just go through them. So, first things first. You use a comma with a coordinating conjunction in a compound sentence. What does that mean? Well, we're not going to talk about what a compound sentence is right now, but we can see that I went to the mall and she loved it are both independent sentences, right? Or they could be. And in front of the she means that it's probably subordinate, and so that comma comes before and. We'll get into all of this more later. You use it after an introductory subordinate clause, prepositional phrase, verb phrase, whatever. So something like, after the circus, Mel and Matt went to the dinner. Use it before a subordinate clause that follows the main sentence. We should have gone to the party, despite the fact we hate her. So this is sort of like that first one, except it's not in front of it's not in front of a coordinating conjunction. That's really the only difference. And then to set off non-restrictive clauses, which just means information you don't need. My brother, the biggest jerk I know, is going to military school. He may be a jerk, but we don't really need to know that. Commas, parte dos. We use a comma after nouns of direct address. For example, students, comma, please party hard this weekend. Or we could also say, Sally, please eat that cake. You don't actually need to say please, but it does come after direct address. We also use it before a direct quote, something that we would put inside of quotation marks. The waiter asked the woman, comma, who do you think I am? Between coordinate adjectives, ones that you couldn't put and between. So, the fun, exciting book versus the huge red ball. Say it out loud to yourself. The fun and exciting book makes sense still, as opposed to the huge and red ball. We probably wouldn't say that, so that's a good test for that one. Between cities and states as well as dates. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. January 1st, 2016. Woohoo! The last thing we need to talk about is the serial comma. It's a killer! So the use of the comma that most of us think about is the serial comma, which means commas used in a series. And here you actually have a stylistic choice, not necessarily a grammatical choice, between what kind of comma you want to use. So there's the one that's always correct, that's known as the Oxford or the Harvard comma, or you can omit the final comma in a series. So that's actually pretty common in scientific and business writing, though sometimes it can lead to confusion. For example, let's look at the sentences, we invited the strippers, JFK and Stalin, okay? So, in the first sentence, we are saying we invited the strippers, who are JFK and Stalin. In the second sentence, we are saying we invited the strippers, JFK, and Stalin, 3 different crews. If this does not make sense to you by the way I'm explaining it, this picture should clear things up. As always, if you would like extra help, you can go to the Hacker, or you can check out CourseWeb Diagramming Sentences. This means you're a Dementor. This means you're Ron Weasley. Commas. They defeat Voldemort, y'all.